My name is Amelia. This story isn't about me, not exactly, it's about my mother. But I'm the one telling it, and I'm the one who ultimately learned what loyalty truly looks like, and how revenge, when served right, isn't just cold. It's justice. It all began in the early 90s when I was around 15 years old. My mom, Evelyn Thornton, was a single parent trying to make ends meet in a world that never gave her anything for free. She was strong-willed, proud, and determined to carve out a life for us after my dad bailed when I was just a toddler. She raised me alone and worked every kind of job you could imagine. Cleaning houses, waitressing, working nights at the local diner, even stitching clothes for a neighbor's boutique. Whatever put food on the table. She'd always wanted more. Not luxury, just security. A place of her own. A business that wasn't at the mercy of someone else's paycheck. That dream came into focus when she heard about a small convenience store up for sale on the east side of town. It wasn't fancy. A modest corner shop with a cracked linoleum floor and faded signage. But it was clean, had decent foot traffic, and the current owner, a man named Richard Matthews, made it sound like a gold mine. He spun a story about needing to sell quickly. He claimed he'd been diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer and had only months to live. He said he didn't want to die with business obligations, and that he wanted the shop to go to someone who'd take care of it, someone like my mother. I remember how pale her face turned when he said the words cancer. She just lost her sister to the same disease the year before. And in a way, I think it short-circuited her usual good judgment. She felt sympathy, urgency, and a deep emotional pull to help a man she thought was dying. Richard was smooth. He showed her tax documents, profit reports, and invoices that painted the store as a thriving business. He claimed it brought in close to $8,000 a week, and that it practically ran itself. The price was high, $120,000, more than she had, but he reassured her he'd help set up financing. I remember lying on the shaggy beige carpet in our rented apartment while she went over paperwork at the dinner table. "We won't have to worry anymore," she whispered one night, barely able to contain the hopeful tremble in her voice. "You'll have new shoes for school, Amelia. We'll finally be okay." She cashed out everything. Her tiny savings account. The money she'd inherited when her mother passed. A small loan from a friend who believed in her dream. She scraped together a down payment and signed the papers. A week later, she was the proud owner of Thornton's Corner Market. For the first month, everything felt new and exciting. She painted the interior herself and added a small bulletin board near the counter where local kids could hang up flyers for lost pets or school events. She kept fresh flowers by the register. Her smile looked real for the first time in years. But cracks began to show quickly. The invoices she'd seen? They were fake. Deliveries started arriving late or not at all. Customers trickled in, not flooded. The weekly income was nowhere near what Richard had claimed, closer to $2,500 on a good week, barely enough to keep the lights on. She tried to hold it together. Worked from open to close, 7 days a week. Took to baking muffins at night to sell by morning. Let customers run tabs, even though she couldn't afford to. I watched her hands get rougher, her back curve more with exhaustion. Still, she wouldn't quit. Eventually, even I, a teenager, realized something was deeply wrong. One evening, after closing the shop and dragging herself through the door, she sank into the couch and didn't move for 20 minutes. When I brought her tea, her hands trembled so badly she spilled it all down the front of her uniform. She'd gone to confront Richard once, just once. He laughed in her face. "You bought it as is," he said. "I didn't force your signature." Worse still, she found out from a neighbor that Richard didn't have cancer. He never did. He'd made it up to pressure the sale. By then, she had no money left for legal action. He'd disappeared into a new life, living off her heartbreak. 3 years she held on. 3 years of waking at dawn and collapsing into bed past midnight. She took out a second loan. Missed rent. Sold her car. Ate rice and beans for months. And in the end, she sold the store for half what she paid, barely enough to cover her remaining debts. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. She never spoke of the store again. It became a ghost that lived between us, silent but heavy. Until 15 years later, she told me what Bart had done. My mom didn't tell me about Bart's revenge until last winter. I was visiting her with my husband and our 2 kids, the Christmas lights still blinking lazily on her modest little porch. She looked tired but peaceful, the kind of peace that only comes after years of surviving storms you thought would kill you. We were sitting at the kitchen table, sipping on chamomile tea and catching up. The kids were in the living room, arguing over which Christmas movie to watch, their voices distant enough to give us a little privacy. Out of nowhere, she said, "You know, Bart did something for me years ago. Something big." "Bart?" I asked. "As in Bart Newton?" She nodded. "Yeah. You two used to dig holes in the backyard, remember? Looking for pirate treasure." I laughed. "And you got mad when we hit the water pipe." She smiled softly. "Bart always had your back. He had mine too." I tilted my head. "What are you talking about?" And just like that, she laid it out. The story. The real story. She hadn't told me before, she said, because Bart made her promise not to. "He thought it would be better if you never knew," she whispered, looking out the window like the snow could hear us. "But you're old enough now." Bart had always been around when we were kids. He was a little older, a little taller, with a mouth full of wild ideas and a heart that beat pure gold. Even as a teenager, he was fiercely loyal, to his friends, to his family, to anyone who deserved it. And apparently to my mom. After we moved, Bart stayed in town. Took over his dad's real estate business. I lost touch when I moved out and started college in New York. Life got busy and so did I. What I didn't know was that Bart never forgot what happened to my mom. And he never forgave the man who did it. Richard Matthews had moved into a gated neighborhood just outside of town. Started going by Rick. Still smug, still wealthy, and somehow still fooling people. But Bart, he kept an eye on him. He watched the kind of car Richard drove. He paid attention when Richard put his house up for sale. He made himself available. He approached him like a buyer, my mom said. Told him he was looking to downsize. Said he'd just gone through a divorce and wanted to simplify. Played it like a pro. I was stunned. He conned the con man? More like tricked the trickster, but with elegance. She went on to explain how Bart earned Richard's trust over the span of a year. They went out for beers. Bart asked about the property market. Feigned admiration for how Richard turned his life around. Meanwhile, he was just waiting. Patient. Calculated. Eventually, Richard agreed to let Bart act as his selling agent. It wasn't a formal contract, more of a handshake deal, but Bart was given access to the property to help stage it. He was let in after open houses, to tidy up, to lock up. That's when he found it. A heavy, sealed cardboard box hidden in the ceiling crawl space. Covered in dust. Packed in a way that suggested it hadn't been touched in years. And it was heavy. Bart didn't open the top. He carefully cut open the bottom flap, like a magician preparing a trick, and peeked inside. Inside were rows of glinting metal, dull but unmistakably gold. Not jewelry. Not coins. Bars. Bart didn't panic. He didn't steal it outright. Instead, over the next week, he had exact replicas made out of lead by a guy who made fishing sinkers. He painted them to match the dull hue of the real bars. Then he made the switch. But here's the thing, he left the top layer intact. So if Richard ever opened it up and took a glance, he'd see exactly what he expected to see. Real gold. No reason to dig deeper. 3 months later, the house sold. Richard moved out. The box, presumably, went with him. But it wasn't filled with wealth anymore. The gold? Bart sold it discreetly, piece by piece, over the course of a year. Avoided attention. Avoided suspicion. And when all was said and done, he handed my mom an envelope. "Don't ask me where it came from," he told her. "Just know it's yours." There was $35,000 in cash inside. My mom cried when she told me that part. "He saved me," she said, her eyes welling up. "I didn't even know how badly I needed that until I had it." She used the money to pay off lingering debt. Got her car fixed. Fixed her teeth. For the first time in years, she could breathe without checking her bank balance 3 times a day. I sat there, stunned, running my finger around the rim of my tea mug. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because Bart asked me not to," she said simply. "And because I didn't want you to think revenge was the answer." I didn't say what I was really thinking. That sometimes it is. After Mom finished telling me everything, I went home and sat in my car for a while, parked in the driveway while the heater hummed softly and the kids slept in the back seat. Snowflakes scattered across the windshield, catching light like little diamonds. But all I could think about was Bart. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. He'd been the kind of friend that made you feel safe without even trying. When we were younger, he once walked me home from school in the pouring rain, just so I wouldn't have to be alone. He gave me his jacket and told me not to give it back until it was dry, even though he went home soaking wet. That was Bart. Loyal to a fault. Now, learning that he had carried the weight of my mother's betrayal for all those years, that he had risked so much quietly for her, it struck something deep inside me. I waited 2 days before calling him. I found his number in an old phonebook app on my laptop. When he answered, his voice was exactly as I remembered. Calm. Solid. Like nothing could shake it. "Hey Bart, it's me," I said. There was a pause. "Well, I'll be damned. Natalie?" "Yeah. I saw Mom. She told me everything." Another pause. Then a soft chuckle. "I asked her not to." "I know. But she did. And I just wanted to say thank you. I don't even have the words." "You don't need to," he said. "Your mom's a good woman. What happened to her? It ate at me." We talked for an hour that night. About Richard. About the shop. About the way my mom had tried to stay strong while everything collapsed around her. Bart told me he knew it wasn't about the money. It was the way he lied to her. Played her. Made her feel stupid for trusting someone. "And he never found out?" I asked. "Nope. Not a word. Either he never opened the box, or he was too ashamed to admit what happened." "Did you ever feel guilty?" He paused again, but this time longer. "I felt something," he admitted. "Not guilt. But weight. Like I'd taken on a piece of her pain and made it my own." I swallowed hard. "That's kind of beautiful." "No. It was necessary." I didn't know what to say to that. There are people who talk about loyalty, and then there are people who live it like gospel. Bart was the latter. He didn't need thanks. He didn't want recognition. He just wanted justice in whatever form he could manage. After that call, I couldn't stop thinking about how much had been lost because of one man's greed. How my mom had aged in those years like life was pressing down on her. And how Bart, through sheer love and loyalty, had taken something back, even if it wasn't everything. And then came the twist. A week later, I got a Facebook message from someone I didn't recognize. The name was Terry L., but the profile was suspiciously sparse. Just a photo of a car and a quote from some philosopher. The message read, "Tell your friend Bart I know what he did. Thought you'd gotten away with it, huh?" My heart sank. I didn't respond immediately. I called Bart, sent him a screenshot. He called me back within minutes. "It's him," he said flatly. "Richard." "Yeah. He's trying to scare us." "But how would he?" "Doesn't matter," Bart interrupted. "He's fishing. He probably noticed the weight was off when he moved. Or someone told him something. Either way, he doesn't have proof. And he won't go to the police because that would mean admitting he had undeclared gold in his ceiling." That made sense, but I still felt a shiver crawl down my spine. "What should we do?" I asked. "Nothing. Don't respond. Don't engage. He's desperate." I wanted to believe him, but the next message shook me harder. "Your mom won't be so smug when I'm done. One call to the tax office and she's finished." My hands trembled as I read it aloud to Bart. He was quiet, but I could hear his breathing. It was steady. Angry. "He wants to scare us into giving it back," Bart said. "But he can't. Because he knows what he did was illegal too. He'll never step into a courtroom with that kind of liability." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I've got something," he added. "Something I didn't tell your mom. Insurance just in case." "What kind of insurance?" "I'll show you. Come by tomorrow. Noon." Bart's house hadn't changed much since we were kids. It was a modest place tucked between two tall pines with cracked concrete steps and a wind chime that jingled like a nervous laugh. The porch creaked as I stepped up, and before I could knock, the door opened. He looked the same, older, sure, with streaks of gray at his temples, but the same solid presence. Grounded. Unshaken. "Come in," he said simply. The inside smelled like coffee and cedar. His living room was clean but sparse, no photos, no decorations. Just a man who lived with intention. We sat across from each other at his kitchen table, the kind that had felt countless elbows and held late-night conversations over too many cups of tea. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. Bart stood and walked to the hallway closet. He pulled out a locked metal box, heavy and matte black, fireproof from the look of it. He set it down between us with a dull thud. I leaned closer as he opened it and pulled out an old camcorder, the kind that took mini tapes. "What is that?" "Watch," he said. He placed the camera on the table and turned the screen toward me. After a few seconds of static, the footage began. The date in the corner read, June 6, 1993. I watched stunned as the screen revealed the crawl space in Richard's house. A flashlight beam illuminated a cardboard box. Then came Bart's voice off camera. Richard told me he was downsizing. Said his kids were grown and he didn't need the space anymore. Funny. Didn't mention the gold in his ceiling. The camera zoomed in on the sealed box. Bart cut the flap open and slowly peeled it back. My breath caught in my throat. Shiny bricks. Rows of them. Gleaming even in the dim light. Gold. The tape continued as Bart carefully removed the top layer and exposed the hidden stash below, most of which had already been swapped with dull, weighty lead bars. He spoke in a calm, journalistic tone. "I'm not doing this for money," he said. "I'm doing this for Evelyn. For the woman he conned and left with nothing. You don't get to lie and walk away clean." The camera panned up briefly to show Bart's face. He looked younger, maybe 30, but his expression was the same as always, unwavering. He turned off the flashlight and the screen went dark. Bart clicked the camcorder off and placed it back into the box. "I recorded that the day after I made the switch," he said. "I've had it ever since." "Why?" I asked, still trying to process what I'd seen. In case he came sniffing around. In case he ever made threats. And now he has. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the moment settle between us like thick smoke. "He'll never see it coming," Bart added. "If he tries anything, I send that video to the police. Or to the press. Let the world know exactly what kind of man he is." "But won't it incriminate you too?" Bart gave a small, cold smile. "Not really. There's no proof I sold the gold. No proof I took anything. It's just a recording of what I found. Maybe I left it, maybe I didn't. But Richard? He'd have to explain how he came to own so much undeclared bullion. And why it was hidden in his ceiling." He was right. It was checkmate. And somehow, Bart had been playing chess all these years while Richard thought he'd already won. The next few weeks were quiet, but the tension remained, like the smell of ozone before a storm. Richard didn't message me again, but I noticed a few odd things. My mom's mailbox was tampered with. A car she didn't recognize parked across her street 2 nights in a row. Nothing major, just enough to raise the hairs on your neck. Bart wasn't rattled. He started leaving voicemails for Richard, calm ones. "Hey, Rich. Just a friendly reminder. I've still got the tape. The one with your name, your attic, and your dirty secrets. So maybe think twice before you go poking the bear, yeah?" No swearing. No threats. Just facts served cold. Then one day it stopped. No more lurking cars. No more strange calls. No more Richard. It was like he vanished. But Bart knew better. "He's just waiting," he told me. "Waiting for me to slip up. Or maybe trying to figure out who else knows." That's when I realized I did. I was no longer a bystander. I was part of the story now, a chapter Richard hadn't counted on. And I wasn't going to sit quietly either. That night I started writing. Not a journal entry. Not a blog post. A manuscript. Bitter Gold, A Daughter's Reckoning. The truth wrapped in fiction. Every lie, every betrayal, every stolen coin turned into a metaphor, a parable of justice served by quiet hands. It wasn't just about my mom anymore. It was about women like her, taken advantage of by silver-tongued predators who thought compassion was weakness and kindness was a flaw. It was about daughters who carried their mother's shame until it hardened into steel. Bart gave me the story. But I would be the one to tell it. By the time autumn rolled in, leaves weren't the only things changing colors. My manuscript, Bitter Gold, had quietly made its way into the hands of a small indie publisher through a friend of Bart's in Sydney. The story was disguised enough to pass as fiction, but those who knew, and Richard certainly did, would read between the lines. The book wasn't a bestseller. But it didn't need to be. It started with an online review titled, "This sounds a little too real." Then a comment thread grew, connecting dots and places and names. Within 2 weeks, a local blog picked up on the story, dubbing it Australia's real-life revenge thriller. Readers speculated. Some even shared photos of a shop in the western suburbs, now long closed. One commenter said, "I swear my uncle knew the guy who used to own that place. Swore he got rich overnight and vanished." Bart called me the day the story hit Reddit. "You might want to brace yourself," he said. "Why? It's still technically fiction." "Sure," he replied. "But fiction has a funny way of sounding like confession when someone's guilty enough." And he was right. Richard wasn't going to stay quiet forever. 2 nights later, someone tried to break into my car. Nothing was stolen. Just the glove box rummaged through, papers tossed everywhere, and my mum's address circled on a rental agreement that had been folded in the back. The message was clear. I didn't tell her. Instead, I called Bart. He showed up with a new dashcam, a set of window alarms, and something I never expected from him, a burner phone. "What's this for?" "If anything happens," he said, "don't call the cops first. Call me." His eyes were dark with something deeper than anger, a protective fury that made my throat tighten. Meanwhile, the book kept spreading. A local radio station interviewed me under a pen name. The host asked, "What inspired this?" And I said, "Sometimes the best revenge isn't fire, it's telling the story they prayed would never come to light." It was vague enough. But Richard heard it loud and clear. The next week, Bart called me in the middle of the night. "He's back in town." My blood went cold. "How do you know?" "Because someone just tried to follow me home." It escalated quickly. Bart started receiving anonymous emails from burner addresses. They didn't say much, just phrases like "you don't know who you're messing with" or "undo what you've done." One even had a single line, "2 kilos buys a lot of silence." I was scared, but Bart, he was calm. Focused. Like a soldier who had already accepted the war. He handed me a small flash drive. "If anything ever happens to me, send this to every news outlet you can find. It's the full recording. The gold, the confession, everything." "You're scaring me," I whispered. "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you sharp." Then, out of nowhere, everything went quiet again. No messages. No shadowy figures. No threats. Just silence. Bart thought it was over. But I knew better. So did Mum. She finally broke her own silence, sitting me down one morning with trembling hands and saying, "He knows where I live." That's when I realized the full weight of this revenge. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was survival. We weren't playing a game. We were walking a razor-thin line between telling the truth and lighting a fuse too hot to contain. And Richard? He was the kind of man who didn't like losing, especially not to a woman. Especially not to 2. So I did what Richard never expected. I invited him to talk. An anonymous email sent to his old business address, encrypted and cold. "Meet me at the old shop. Midnight. No police. No weapons. Just the truth. You owe her that." Bart lost it when I told him. "You're out of your mind." "Maybe," I said. "But if he's going to come for us anyway, I'd rather be ready." And so at midnight, I walked into the place where it all started, the shuttered convenience store that had stolen my mother's spirit, and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, headlights. A car rolled up, slow and careful. He stepped out. Older, heavier, balding, but it was him. Richard. The man who conned my mum, who vanished like smoke, now standing 10 feet from me with the ghost of a smirk on his face. "You're her daughter, aren't you?" he said. I didn't flinch. "And you're still a coward," I replied. He laughed. "You think writing some book and hiding behind fake names makes you clever? That gold was mine. That story was fiction." "No," I said. "That story was survival. And your name? It's not in the book. Yet." He stepped closer. "Take it down," he growled. "Or I'll burn down every bridge your family ever built." I didn't move. "Go ahead," I said. "Just know if anything happens to me, your real name, gets published. With footage. With evidence. With everything." We stared at each other. Two people bound by the same thread, pulled tight by time and pain. Finally, he stepped back. "This isn't over," he spat. "No," I said. "It just finally is." The night after Richard stormed off from our confrontation at the shop, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in hand, waiting for the retaliation I knew could come from any direction. A rock through the window. A phone call in the middle of the night. A fire. Something. But it never came. Morning arrived like a tentative peace treaty. The sky outside was a pale gray, uncertain, and I matched its energy. I made a strong pot of coffee and drove straight to Mum's place before she could read anything in the paper or hear from the gossip mill. She opened the door before I could knock, already dressed and holding 2 mugs. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked. I didn't need to confirm. She always knew when I was carrying a storm behind my eyes. We sat in her little kitchen, the air heavy with memories and things unsaid. The kettle whistled long after it should have been turned off. Finally, she broke the silence. "I should have fought harder back then," she said. "I let that man ruin years of my life. I just folded." "No," I said quietly. "You survived. That's not folding. That's fighting in slow motion." She looked at me, eyes watering. "You're so much stronger than me." "I'm strong because of you." And in that moment, we weren't a daughter and a mother torn apart by a scam. We were 2 women who had finally confronted the ghost of their shared past. And won. But peace, like all things, had conditions. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Bart showed up at my flat with a thick manila envelope. "Everything," he said, placing it on the table. "Photos of the gold. The original switch. Video files. Emails from the estate sale. Even the fake diagnosis Richard used to con your mum." "Why now?" I asked, staring at the folder like it might explode. "Because he's not going to stop. Not really. This," he tapped the folder, "is a nuclear option. If he ever comes back, we go public. Full exposure. Real names, dates, receipts. It'll ruin him." I nodded, not wanting to admit I'd already created a backup copy on the cloud weeks ago. "You've changed," he said softly. "I had to." He smiled. "Your mum would have never made it through this without you. Neither would I." We sat in silence, no need to fill the space with more words. Bart had done what no man had before him. He didn't try to fix me. He stood beside me and helped me fix what had been broken long before I was old enough to name it. The book gained traction in the months that followed. A YouTube channel picked it up, adapting it into an animated short. It went viral. Podcasts began inviting me on, treating the whole thing like a true crime thriller. I always spoke carefully, never naming names, never claiming full truth, but it didn't matter. People knew. Whispers grew into speculation, and speculation eventually landed on Richard's doorstep. He sold his house in a hurry. Moved to a coastal town nobody cared about. Rumor had it he tried to file a defamation suit but couldn't prove damages without admitting the story was true. Funny how that works. Mum got anonymous flowers one day. No note. Just a black ribbon. She didn't flinch. She just put them in the bin. "I hope he's watching," she said. "Let him see me live." 6 months later, Bart moved away. Said he needed clean air, fewer ghosts. He left me with the burner phone and a box of old photographs from the shop. Inside was a picture I'd never seen. My mum, younger than I ever remembered her, standing in front of the store holding a set of keys and smiling like she hadn't yet realized how cruel the world could be. On the back, Bart had written, "We get to rewrite the ending." I still write. I still get messages from women who saw themselves in our story. Some are angry. Some are grateful. All of them are tired of being the ones who get left to clean up the wreckage. Sometimes I reply. Most times I don't know what to say. But if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this. Justice doesn't always wear a badge or carry a gavel. Sometimes it looks like a daughter. Sometimes it looks like a mate. Sometimes it looks like 2 kilos of silence tucked away in a crawl space. And sometimes it looks like a woman who stopped running from the truth and made sure the whole damn world heard it.